So shalom and welcome all to the third lecture about Joshua's altar. Today we will hear Dr. Scott Stripling, and I have to just say a few words about how I met Scott. A few years ago, Dr. Scott Stripling and his crew excavated a site called Khirbet Makatir, which is a Jewish village from the Second Temple period with also much earlier layers. And during their excavation, they found in an olive press, an underground olive press, 7 skeletons of women. This was a Jewish village from the Second Temple period. And you know, usually what archaeologists do is they take the bones, they research them, and then they store them somewhere. But not Scott and his crew. They came to the elders of my community, Ofra, and they suggested that we do a funeral for these 7 women who were massacred by the Romans. And so we did. We actually made a funeral. We buried the 7 skeletons in what we call a sister tomb in the cemetery in Ofra, and you can visit it today. This is a tomb of women that were massacred 2,000 years ago, 2 years before the destruction of the Second Temple. And since that special event, Scott and I have been in touch with each other, specifically about Joshua's altar and other projects in this area. So it's a great honor to have Scott today to speak to us. I just want to mention some backgrounds. I think that the 2 blows that we suffered concerning Joshua's altar is one, that there is no final report of the finds from the 1980s, from the excavations of Adam Zertal. And because there is no final report, there is no academic recognition. The second blow that we suffered from was the Oslo agreements putting the altar in Area B, which is outside of the grasp of the archaeological academic world of Israel. And therefore, we cannot excavate there. And I think Scott is going to speak about that later on. But we were in a situation where we basically thought that this whole thing is gone and we can't excavate, we can't research Joshua's altar anymore. And the meeting that Scott and I did together kind of promoted this specific topic, and Scott is going to talk about that. I'll present Scott. Scott Stripling is the director of excavations and chief archaeologist at ancient Shiloh. Okay, I'll start again. Scott Stripling is the director of excavations and chief archaeologist at ancient Shiloh. From 2017 present, and previously directed the excavations at Khirbet el-Makatir from 2013 to 2017. He also served as a field supervisor at the Tel el-Hamam excavation project and the Temple Mount Sifting project. Stripling earned master's degrees from the University of Texas and the Assemblies of God Theological Seminary and the PhD in Archaeology and Biblical History from Veritas International University. He serves as Provost and Director of the Archaeological Institute at the Bible Seminary in Katy, Texas. Stripling is a popular speaker, very popular, and author, and frequently appears as a scholar in documentaries and popular media programs. His geographical research focus lies in the highlands of Israel across multiple time periods, ranging from the late Bronze Age to the early Islamic period. He is a professional member of Assur that currently serves as vice president of the Near East Archaeological Society. In December 2019, Stripling's ABR team wet sifted Adam Zertal's dump piles from Mount Ebal resulting in a find of great importance, which we will hear about. He and his wife, Janet, have 4 children and 4 grandchildren. So without further ado, we will hear Dr. Scott review of the wet sifting project. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them at the chat box, and Scott will answer these questions at the end of his presentation. Scott, go ahead.
Shalom, Aaron. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes, we hear you perfectly.
Okay, great. Well, thank you guys for joining from all over the world, and the ones that are here with me in Texas, thank you also. I'm excited about this online conference. I listened to Shaibar 2 weeks ago and Ralph Hawkins last week, and I learned new stuff from them. And so I'm confident that you guys will also learn some new information today, and in particular about the wet sifting project that we did on the Mount Ebal material, but also about the altar itself and the larger context of it. Then, of course, we're looking forward to Zvi and Aaron in the coming weeks. And so I want to thank Shai and Ralph already for the things that they have shared and for their expertise. And Aaron, thank you for organizing the conference. And it's exciting to see how everybody is kind of synergistically sharing information. And the project that we did in Israel on Mount Ebal would not have happened without Aaron being on the ground there and acting and prodding and inviting and threatening and cajoling and doing a lot of other things on the ground. And, you know, we were able to raise some money and to bring a team and sort of do the archaeological side of things. But without that kind of synergistic partnership, this would have never happened. And I think it's very critical to what we're going to be able to do in the future as far as research on Mount Ebal. I mean, these are sites that are biblical sites, and we're talking about the history of redemption that's unfolding, the beginning of the sacrificial system, and how Israel gains a foothold in the land. So I think they're critical importance. And so after having worked for many years in the highlands of Israel, I was thrilled to be able to do some work on Mount Ebal, and God willing, we'll do more work there in the future. Aaron mentioned that the altar falls within Area B politically from the Oslo Accords. Unfortunately, just by a tiny bit. I mean, it could have been easily moved so that it was an Area C that we could do additional work. But as it stands right now, it's a challenge for us. So having said that, let me dig into the material. And if you have questions, just type them into the text box, and I'll try to answer as many as I can briefly when we come to the end. And I may need my tech support to come help me. I'm not advancing. Forgive me, I'm using a laptop that I'm not used to and a system that I'm not used to. So the forward arrow is not getting me to the next slide. You don't go far. All right, you may have seen this. You may have seen this slide before. Larry Steger was the dean at Harvard, and you know Larry's word carried a lot. And Larry was a great archaeologist, and but he was very skeptical of Zertal's finds in the 1980s at El Bernat on Mount Ebal, whether this actually was an altar. In fact, you might even call this hubris. Larry Steger says, if there is an altar on Mount Ebal, as Zertal claims, we biblical scholars and archaeologists should all go back to kindergarten. And so all I can say now is that class is in session because indeed we do have an altar on Mount Ebal, and I'm going to prove it to you. Here is a slide that Shai showed 2 weeks ago, and you can see the cult site itself, which is on step 2. If you picture Mount Ebal, those of you who have been there, as you go over the crest, there are several steps, and which makes good sense. If you're going to build an altar, you need a flat area. And even the prepositions in Hebrew seem to read in Mount Ebal, not on Mount Ebal, which would sort of make sense of why it's located where it is. But this is where he found this large stone structure, not at all expecting it to be an altar. And only after several years did he come to that conclusion. Of course, the biblical text says in Joshua 8:30 that Joshua built an altar on Mount Ebal. And this is after the victory at Jericho, the defeat at Ai, the victory at Ai, and then going north with Gerizim on one side and Ebal on the other. Joshua builds an altar. The question was, is there archaeological evidence of that? And that's what we're exploring in our conference. And then you'll see Mount Gerizim on the opposite side with ancient Shechem in the middle. And of course, Shechem goes back to even before the Middle Bronze Age into the Intermediate Bronze Age. But the patriarchs had deep ties there, probably even owned land there. And when Joshua and the Israelites arrive at Shechem, the Bible doesn't use the word Shechem. It says they went with Mount Gerizim on one side and Mount Ebal on the other, assuming that the reader would know that Shechem is there in between the two. And so they stand there with the ark and with the Levites in the middle, and then 6 tribes on Mount Gerizim pronouncing blessings, 6 from Mount Ebal pronouncing curses. Now don't forget that, the curses part, because that's going to be critical to what we found in our sifting project. We have a temple there called the Temple of Baal Berith, mentioned in Judges chapters 8 and 9, that I think we have likely identified, and that's probably where the ark was when this covenant renewal ceremony took place. So this will orient you just a little bit. Maybe we are 35 miles north of Jerusalem, 50 kilometers or so. Now from 82 to 87, Adam Zertal excavated a large rectangular altar from the 13th century BC that covered an older round altar, which was 2 meters in diameter. Now, it is the rectangular altar that has gotten all the media and all the press, and my colleagues, Shai and Ralph, have gone on and on about that rectangular altar. It's very important, it's very exciting, and it's from the biblical period. But what I want to focus in more on today is the smaller round altar that is 2 meters in diameter that sat underneath it. Zertal dated that rectangular altar, which was his stratum 1. So stratum 1A, to remind you, was the stone mantle that covered the altar. When the altar was decommissioned in about 1150 BC, they intentionally piled stones on top of it to cover it, what we would call a temenos, something sacred had happened there. So ultimately it's buried. So it did not suffer disuse over many, many centuries because it's protected by that mantle or shroud of stones over it. So that was Zertal's stratum 1A. 1B is the main structure that you've been hearing about, the rectangular structure. And then underneath that is stratum 2. And Zertal does not subdivide stratum 2, but it's just saying that that's the earliest material dating to about the mid 13th century. And what I'm going to suggest to you today is that stratum 2, in fact, should, and that Zertal, had he been allowed to finish his research and do his final publications, may very well have come to the same conclusion, that stratum 2 should be subdivided, and that we actually have material that deals with the earliest period of the biblical conquest. So let me say a word or two about that. Both Ralph and Shai would be taking a late date for the Exodus. I'm not sure where Zvi and Aaron stand on this. Maybe, I think Aaron may still be open-minded and hasn't maybe decided. He's trying to play both sides of the fence. I'm coming from what you would call the early date or the biblical date for the Exodus and conquest. Now there's a brand new book out and I'm a co-author. I wrote chapter 1, which is the early date or biblical date of the Exodus. It's only been out a few months by Zondervan, called 5 Views on the Exodus. And you can pick that up and you'll have all the reasons why I believe that that's our correct dating scheme. The reason that matters is because if we're wrong on the date, then the archaeological material is going to seem not to fit. And so everything I'm going to say is presupposing that the biblical date, which is an Exodus in 1446 and a conquest beginning about 1406, is the correct time period. So Zertal dated that large rectangular altar that you've come to know now to the end of the 13th century BC and the round altar to the mid 13th century BC. So he has one immediately after the other. So in his view, the round altar, 2 meters by 2 meters, is Joshua's altar. Let me say that several times, because up to this point, I think everybody's thinking that the rectangular altar is Joshua's altar. The rectangular altar is a memorial altar. It is built, and that's regardless of the chronology. Okay, Adam Zertal did not believe that the rectangular altar was Joshua's altar. He believed that it was a memorial altar which covered that round altar, which is where the actual event took place. Now, it's continued use in the period of the Judges, and the biblical period is significant to all of us. The difference is that Zertal is saying you have one generation and then immediate use into the next generation for about 100 years, from about 1350 to 1250 BC for the period. What I'm going to suggest to you today and ask you to consider is that the foundation of the altar actually goes back to about 1400 BC, what we would call the late bronze 1B, late bronze 2A horizon. And I'm going to show you the pottery and the reasons why from Zertal's own findings. So I would suggest that stratum 2 should also be divided into A and B. All right, geometry. It is no coincidence that the round altar is at the perfect geometric center of the rectangular altar. Things like that just don't occur accidentally. So intentionally, these early Israelite ancestors of ours, built an altar that protected the earlier altar and made it a temenos. It's at the perfect geometric center. And as I said, it's at the second step on El Bernat in a foot-shaped enclosure. Now, I think Shai and Ralph both touched on this, but let me remind you that we have a series of foot-shaped enclosures, at least 6 that we know of, that come up the Jordan Valley. So if you're picturing from down near Jericho, for example, you begin to have these very large foot-shaped enclosures, maybe the size of a football field or something like this. So a foot-shaped enclosure, and then miles up the road, another one, and then another, and then another, and then another. Now, the challenge is dating these structures because they're not continuously occupied. And so can we be certain that it's Bronze Age or that it's Iron Age? I know at Argaman, Shai a couple of years ago was able to do some excavation there, but he'll tell you that it's a difficult thing to date with certainty. His earliest pottery is late Bronze Age, and then it's mainly Iron Age. So we can all interpret that however we want to interpret it. But do remember what the Lord told Joshua, that wherever your feet set, I will give you. And this is the same promise that Abraham had been given. So I don't think it's insignificant that you have these foot-shaped enclosures going up the Jordan Valley. I think intentionally, and some of them with altars in the middle of them. That matters because Ebal, Mount Ebal at El Bernat, that's the last of them. That's for now, at least that have been found. Some of them may have existed and they've been destroyed, or others of them maybe haven't been found yet. But that's the final one in that progression of foot-shaped enclosures. And it's there that Joshua builds an altar with Mount Gerizim, then of course across the valley. Now you can see here the altar. You're becoming very familiar with this by now, off in the distance. And if you can think back to your first time of going to Mount Ebal, or maybe for some of you, this is your first time to see it today, it's quite exhilarating. It's almost like watching your bride walk down the aisle. Okay, there she is. I wondered if this day would ever come. And so when you see Mount Ebal and you realize, okay, Joshua was here, and this is where people came to connect with God. Something very significant happened in this place. And that's what a temenos is. That's whether it's standing up a stone like a masavah, or whether it's a heap offering or an altar, it's in essence to say that God did something in this place. So as you begin to approach, which is no easy thing, back in the day, as we would say, we had to park a long distance and walk down a really steep hill, which, I mean, the hill was so steep, even if you were careful, sometimes you would slip going down it. So, you know, very problematic for doing an excavation and getting people and material in and out. When we got ready to do our project, one of the things that Aaron and I worked on was we would like the local municipality to pave that steep road so that we can get in and out. It was going to be wintertime. We knew it would be wet. And lo and behold, they agreed to do it at their expense. And so this was quite shocking that a municipality would pony up money for us. And then we were raising money for the actual excavation. And then, of course, we had to have a place to do it. Being in Area B was the problem. So we were not doing actual excavation. What our intent was to take the dump piles from the 1980s from 2 sites, Shiloh from the 1980s, the Bar Ilan excavation, and Zertal's excavation from the 1980s, and to wet sift that using this new technology, which we had found to be revolutionary. My initial findings at Shiloh had been, because of course we're excavating there now and had access to the material, that for every 1 scarab that digs were finding in the past, we were finding 5. For every 1 bula that they were finding, we were finding 5. And so this was suggesting to me that about 80% of the small finds were being discarded in the past by good archaeologists. And, no one's doing this on purpose. But the thing, as an archaeologist, we only get one bite at the apple. You can't redo the experiment. We destroy the evidence in the process and we make it inaccessible to others. And so we have to do it right. And if we're missing 80% of the evidence, how can we draw reliable conclusions? So what I wanted to do is what Herschel Shanks had been beating the drums for about 20 years, is let's go back to old dump piles and let's wet sift them. He suggested Megiddo, but that would take decades probably to wet sift that dump pile. But we took these two as a test case, and we thought, let's dry sift again, and then we'll wet sift. And based on my initial probes, we are going to find a lot that is in these dump piles that was unintentionally thrown away. And so that's what we had to do. We had to relocate the material. And so again, with Aaron's help on the ground, and I should also give a shout out to Boaz and Shuki and all these, all of our Israeli friends and Zvi and so many people since the 1980s that have been committed to seeing this project through. Truly, we could not have done this without everybody's help. Our friends from Hayovel in Israel and the labor that they provided, and people who donated money so that we could have the equipment that we needed, and just all of that happening. To make a long story short, we were able to locate a significant portion of the west dump pile and some of the east dump pile, ultimately to Shavet Shomron, where a building had burned down. And I'll show you a video of it in a minute. And because the building had burned down, their loss, of course, we were able to scrape down to the foundation and use that as a sort of launching point for our work. We built a provisional wet sifting station there, so big dry sifters and then wet sifters, and then a processing system to take it all through our protocols. So that was the goal, and that's what we did. And in visiting the site, you can see this is about 3 winters ago when my team is visiting Manival before the road was paved, and sort of wrapping our minds around how would we pull this off and all the obstacles, and Aaron can tell you that I don't take rejection very well. And, when we would run into obstacles, oh, you can't, let's wait till next year. And, oh, we can't do this. I don't take rejection well. And so I insisted that it's now, and we're doing it. And, we're committed, we're buying plane tickets, and we've raised money, and we're showing up, and you better have some dirt, So, and of course, he was extremely cooperative in trying to make all this happen. And so my team is here fascinated by the opportunity, and that's what you're seeing in the picture. When I say mine, I'm talking about the Associates for Biblical Research, which has been working in the highlands of Israel for 43 years. And Aaron mentioned our work at Makatir, where we uncovered the human remains, and the monument sits now in Ofra. Prior to that, we excavated at Kerbet Nisia. Now we're at Kerbet Sailun or Shiloh. So it gives us a regional overview of the area, and then Manival as well. So it's a long-term commitment, and ABR is a consortium of 11 universities in the United States and 5 Israeli universities. And so it's sort of an umbrella that everybody can come and work together underneath. And I have the privilege of then directing the entire operation. And this, you can look down on the altar, of course, with the wonder of drone photography, which is still pretty new. When I first flew a drone 7 years ago on an archaeological site, everyone stopped working and got their cameras out to take pictures. It was so amazing. And now, of course, it's just a daily occurrence. We're taking thousands of drone shots every day. We're compressing them in our photogrammatic software, creating 3D models with them. And so it's phenomenal. We don't even draw archaeological squares anymore. We just hover the drone right over it and take we can't draw it as well as the photographs. So archaeology is still very low tech on one hand, because you have to have human beings involved, but then very high tech on the other. So what you're looking at here is the center. Ralph talked last week about the altar being hollow like the Mishnaic altar, and it has a ramp that's leading up to it. It has not undergone any restoration. By that, I mean mortar. There's no mortar between these stones. And ultimately, if we're able to do further work there, we would want to do, proper restoration on the altar so that centuries from now, it will still be holding up. But at that geometric center of the altar, kind of the shadow in the middle, is where the round altar exists. Now, remember, this was all filled with ash and bone that comes from stratum 2, and then later material, as it's being in stratum 1, it's accumulating new ash and new bone This bone is only from animals from the biblical sacrificial system. So there's 0% pig bone at Ebal. There are some fallow deer, not in the altar itself, but off where Zertal believed there was a 4-room house. But you have sheep, goat, which we would call caprines, and then bovine material within the altar itself. No equids, no horses or donkeys or anything like that. Here's another view of the altar, and now I'm going to push a button and you'll get sort of a flyover idea. You'll be able to see the fresh area where the dump piles were dug. Off to the right of your screen now, where the guy in the blue shirt is. There you get a nice look at the ramp. Very beautiful out here in this foot-shaped enclosure. And of course, politically, this would be Area B today, not far from Nablus. Of course, there was some destruction of this wall since this video was taken last year. Sadly, some locals destroyed part of the outer enclosure wall, just kind of reminding us of the urgency of the excavation we do when we're in the so-called West Bank, Judea, some area. It really is urgent because we have no guarantee that in the future we will have access to that material. Kerbet El Makatir, I mean, we spent 21 years working there, and houses are being built on top of it. If we had not done that, we would never have that data to illuminate the biblical text. I mean, once we have the data and we publish it, which in a few months, the final publications will be out, then everybody can argue about it, you know, from now till kingdom come. But if we can't excavate and record it properly, then it really is a loss to history. Now, here is a replica of the rectangle of the round altar. As I said, 2 by 2 meters, so a little over 3 feet by 3 feet in diameter. Zertal's installation 94. So when we're talking about stratum B, we've got installation 94, pit 250, and surface 61. Those are the 3 main terms. Installation 94, which is the round altar, pit 250, which is the chalice that I'll talk about, that comes from, and then surface 61. That's the earliest material from Ebal that actually would have been something that Joshua would have dealt with. So remember the term installation 94. It's to be built of uncut field stone. No tool was to be used on it. So what you do is there's no shortage of stone in Israel. And so you go through stones until you find one that more or less fits the shape that you want. And if it tends to kind of have a horn or a shape on it, maybe you set that aside. And when you build your altar, it's going to be a horn on the altar, but you're looking for things that are uncut or cut only by the hand of God, perhaps is another way to put it. Now, here is a reconstruction of installation 94. My team was staying at Shave Shomron, where the building had burned down. And this gave us close proximity then to the mountain and to the material. And we did it in the winter, and really it worked out. You're kind of rolling the dice when you do it in the winter. You can see I've got a light jacket on there, and so it's 50s or 60s, sunny most days. You're working outside. It's great working weather. If you've ever been on a dig in the, it's in the 90s and you're just sweltering heat, and that's not as much fun. So we rolled the dice and it worked. We got great working weather. We stayed right next to where we were working, so we could just get up, eat breakfast, and go right to work. From the surplus stone, when these big balas were delivered, weighing a ton each of soil, there was a lot of stone mixed in with it. And so we segregated the stone, and then we dry sifted, and then we did flotation on the dry sifted material so that we could extract seeds and floral material from that, which I'll tell you more about. And then we began to recover flint and pottery and bone and inscriptions and all those the small materials that had been missed, and took it through the protocols. But one of the most significant things that we did was to build this altar. So this altar that you're looking at in this slide is 2 by 2 meters, and it's built from stone from Mount Ebal, from Zertal's dump pile, and as is the soil in between it there. So that stands at Shave Shomron as a memorial to the project. So if you're wanting to picture what did Joshua's altar look like on Mount Ebal, at Joshua 8:30. It's hard to see with the big, rectangular altar over it now, but that's about what it would have looked like. And Perry standing there with me was is my builder, my architect, and so he's earned a good dinner out that night. All the hummus he can eat. So here's a picture of me sitting in the middle, right, literally on top of the round altar, and my left hand is touching the top of the round altar. And so we did not excavate, of course, because we did not have a license to do so, and nor were we prepared to do so. We were there for a very specific project to sift the dump piles. We would love to go back, and I recovered that area, of course, so nobody would be able to see it. But Zertal did not excavate all of the round altar. He wisely left part of it for the future, knowing that maybe one day the political situation would change. Talk about a man of faith, believing that the political situation would improve in Israel. But he left part of it, and it's there waiting for excavation. Our technology is so much better now, and the things that we can do with testing the flora and the fauna and so forth. That's our prayer, and I know that everybody who's part of the course would like to see that happen as well. I will have to tell you, while I'm not a super emotional person, sitting there that day and having seen the project come to fruition and now looking at the top of the round altar, I have to tell you that there was a tear in my Texas eye. Okay, so here's what Zertal wrote, and to remind you, he did publish a very good preliminary report in Tel Aviv Journal. It was long, detailed, so far as preliminary reports go, and Tel Aviv devoted the whole issue to that preliminary report. That said, it's still a preliminary report, and like I know, because I just did final publications on El Makatir, and what we wrote in our preliminary report changed by the time we got, in many cases, to the final report. So we can only imagine some of the final analysis and things that Zertal may have tweaked along the way, but what he did was quite good. So Zertal writes this: Installation 94, which is the round altar, occupied the eastern part of surface 61. It is 2 meters in diameter and built of medium-sized stones, some of them charred, protruding 20 to 25 centimeters above the surface. Its southern side is covered by wall 13, which Ralph talked about last week, of stratum 1B, which effectively canceled its use. In other words, it's built on top of it. It was found covered with stones, beneath which was a 10-centimeter layer of clean ash containing many animal bones, some burnt. The installation is located in the exact center of the overlying building. All right, so for the record, those are Zertal's words. Those are not Stripling's words. It is at the exact center of the overlying structure. And here's what I wrote a few months ago in the 5 views excerpt from Zondervan. I wrote, I see it, the round altar, as more than 1 century older, and believe that Zertal's stratum 2 should be subdivided, and that the material just above bedrock in pit 250, surface 61, and installation 94 derives from the late bronze 1B 2A horizon. It's about 1400 BC. I propose that these loci and installations pertain to a different century, and I call this stratum 2B. Now, here's our guys on the site of the building that had burned down, and I'll play the video for you. And Zach, maybe you can be handy to make sure we've got adequate volume here. Or I don't know if I control the volume or if you do, Aaron.
When you're sharing a video, you need to when you share a screen, you need to select a certain option there to make the video run better. So maybe.
Okay. All right, here we go.
Okay, welcome to the next project, Mount Ebal Dump Salvage. This is day 2, and you can see that we are up and running now. We've got all of our sifted material that is now soaking. This needs to be dry sifted. Emmeline is working with this, and here's Abigail, which is helping me sort yesterday's pottery. And Gary is off to go get something important.
Okay, we're getting feedback. Aaron, is your mic muted?
the sacred soil that we've already.
Are you guys hearing feedback on your end, or am I just getting it here?
Extract seeds. And here is our new wet.
Aaron, were y'all hearing feedback on your end? Because I'm now getting it on my end.
No, we very little feedback. It was good.
The volume was okay. Okay, Zach, I've now got feedback. I'm hearing myself speak. Okay, it went away. All right, so let's go back and try that again. I was afraid that you guys were getting bad feedback. Let's try it again.
Okay, welcome to the MEDS project, Mount Ebal Dump Salvage. This is day 2, and you can see that we are up and running now. We've got all of our sifted material that is now soaking so that they can be dry sifted. This is Emmeline who's working with this, and there's Abigail was just helping me sort yesterday's pottery, and Gary is off to go get something important. You can see here our provisional wet sifting station we were using while we were building our new one that's about to be up and running. Here's the sacred soil that we've already sifted through, and we're doing flotation on some of this also so that we can extract seeds. And here is our new wet sifter that we're building provisionally for this area. And here's Steve, who masterminded the project. And looky here, we're going to be moving up in the world. Suzanne and Greg, say hi to the folks back home who are sending us money. There we go. And here's Melody, who's dry sifting away.
Send money, send money.
Say hi. That's right. Amen. Keep those checks coming. This is Jacob from Springtown. And Jacob's working away here. He's not even seen he's working. Here, he got on my bad side, so he has to scrape the concrete. And Brett working away, cleaning out the rock that's mixed in with the soil, so it will be easier for us to dry sift and then to wet sift. And then here's Ellen, who's going fast at it. And these last two are Texans. And you can see off in the distance Mount Ebal, and then just that way would be ancient Samaria, and then just this way would be Mount Gerizim. And we've got a beautiful day. We're in short sleeves, working away, and just sorted our first day's pottery and finds. Big stuff. So you guys keep praying for us. Appreciate your support.
Okay, well, that gives you an idea, a feel for the project. We were having fun, but also working long, hard hours. And, we had a lot of visitors coming and going. The military had to give us permission to do this. And eventually we made friends with the military hierarchy, and they would come by and visit, and some political dignitaries would come by. And so people knew something interesting and important was happening. And we were trying to sort of be hush-hush, but it didn't work too well. Here is the pumice chalice that you first heard about last week, and it came from Pit 250. So remember that Pit 250 is part of Stratum 2, but I would argue should be Stratum 2B, and it is identical to a pumice chalice from Sedabet Echadim. Now, this is in the southwestern Sinai, a site that Petrie had worked and found numerous inscriptions like Sinai 375A and very famous inscriptions from there. Clearly, a Semitic population was working in those mines, these turquoise mines in the Sinai. In other words, very likely you're talking about Israelites, Hebrews working as slaves in these turquoise mines. And you're finding Semitic material. And you're finding a lot of 18th dynasty material in particular, which fits the early date of the Exodus. And Petrie published this chalice, which now matches the chalice. And I'm calling it a chalice, but Petrie called it an incense altar. So it's a chalice functioning as an incense altar, and it's made of pumice, which is not what you would normally expect with an altar, but both of them are pumice. Now, one interesting thing we could do is test the pumice to see in both cases if it came from the Santorini eruption. That might help us chronologically and also give us some interesting geographical data. But the fact that it's buried in the lowest level, cut into bedrock, and that it matches something found in Egypt gives us a hint or a suggestion that perhaps this is part of that earliest offering at Mount Ebal, dating back to the time of Joshua. And then the vessel in the upper left-hand corner which I'll talk about in just a minute, is also a vessel that dates back to that LB1B, LB2A horizon. Now, Abigail Levitt, if we do a future conference, we should include Abigail. She wrote her master's thesis under my supervision, wrote her master's thesis on Mount Ebal. And Abigail's research is just fantastic. Hot off the press, is about to be published in a few months in a new book coming out. And so I'll alert you guys when it's coming out, because I know you're interested in all the latest Mount Ebal research. But this is what Abigail writes in her MA thesis, unpublished at this point. The chalice originated from pit 250 near installation 94. Zertal suggests that it may have functioned as an incense altar, citing parallels from a temple at Sarabat el-Khadim in Sinai, particularly altar 4. He states that the incense altar from Sarabat el-Khadim belonged to the 19th and 20th dynasties. That would be 13th century Ramesses the Great, by the way. Hawkins echoes these dates, and both cite pages 94 and 95 of Petrie's publication on Sarabat el-Khadim. Yet Petrie does not date the incense altars to the 19th and 20th dynasties. Instead, he notes that their location of origin was near an altar dating to the 12th dynasty, and that altars 1 and 2 were in the style of the 12th dynasty. Petrie does not date the remaining incense altars, but states that the Sarabat el-Khadim temple underwent extensive remodeling and use in the 18th dynasty, which would be the early date, with a few later revisions during the 19th dynasty. In other words, the majority of activity is in the 18th dynasty, not the 19th dynasty. Thus, it seems likely that most of the incense altars from Sarabat el-Khadim had an equal or greater chance of belonging to the 18th dynasty rather than the 19th dynasty. Now, some of you listening are going, who cares? Which, they're both New Kingdom. Egypt's New Kingdom, by the way, encompasses 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties. Well, the reason it matters is because the dating. If it's 18th dynasty, then it's supporting an early date. If it's 19th dynasty, then it's supporting a late date. So I point that out, that Petrie's actual research pointed toward the 18th, not the 19th dynasty. As Adam had incorrectly cited there, as good as he was, he made a mistake there, and that Hawkins made the same mistake. Now you can see our reading of pottery. We excavated over 3,000 sherds, and about 300 of them were diagnostic sherds. Now, from a dump, of course, they've already taken all the good stuff. So we're getting the scraps that they missed. Fortunately, they missed a few good scraps here and there, and some things that are diagnostic. And so here's what an average day looks like. All this has been washed the previous day. It's dried. Now the team's up and working, and I'm there with some people coming in, going, helping me, and we're doing an analysis. Now, so far as pottery goes, this is pretty easy because about 95% of it is Iron Age 1. And once you know the Iron Age 1 pottery, you can easily separate it. That's the period of the judges. But we do have, Zertal found 3% that was late Bronze Age. We found a little bit more than that, and we're going to analyze it more closely to be certain. But somewhere, let's say, between 3% and 9% of the overall pottery is late Bronze Age, some of it all the way back to that LB1B, LB2A horizon, and then a tiny bit from the early Roman and Hellenistic period. So this is sort of what a typical day looks like. You can see the computers and the iPads, and then the pottery, and of course coffee. One cannot be expected to read pottery in the civilized world without coffee. We have low standards, but we do have them.
Or taste the pottery.
Aaron brings up a point that those of us who have developed a more refined taste, we don't only use the senses of feel and sound, but we also taste. Your taste buds on your tongue are far more sensitive than your fingers. And so you can train them over time. I taste pottery is what he's getting at. Okay, so and you can too. You can come with me on a dig and I'll teach you how to do it. Floral and faunal remains. So we're talking about seeds and bones. What did we find in our sifting project? Well, we did flotation on a lot of that soil. So that means that after it was dry sifted and we've got the clean soil, the seeds, of course, are normally tiny, and so they fall through the mesh screen. Then we go back into that pile and we have a water trough, so to speak, and we're taking the soil in there, we stir it up, the sediment sinks to the bottom, we scoop the seeds off, and then we put them in like envelopes, kind of like on a clothesline to dry, and then we do the net spots. We have people doing that all day long. So we did a lot of flotation for seeds, and that is very interesting because Zertal, I don't know if he did flotation, but he didn't publish any flotation. So that means that we know nothing about the floral remains from Joshua's altar until now. Now, fortunately, I finally have these back from Bar Ilan University. See, when I left Israel, you have to understand, in January of 2019, or was it 2020? Anyway, COVID broke out immediately after that. I thought I'd be back in a few months. I would have access to this material. I'd be getting it to the labs and getting things analyzed. So I've had no access to anything until finally about 2 months ago, I was allowed to come into Israel for just a short-term project. Now, I will be there this January and this summer, and we'll speed things up. But fortunately, before I left Israel the first time, I left the seeds with a botanist at Bar Ilan. And so we do have the seeds now categorized and separated. I don't have possession of them yet. I can't tell you the analysis and so forth. I will be able to hopefully soon, but that will actually add to our corpus of understanding about what diet was at Mount Ebal. So I think we all believe it was a cultic site. There's no doubt about that. But what were they eating? Not just meat, but what were they eating as far as, plant life as well? We'll know more about that. Now, our project, MEDS, incidentally, MEDS, stands for Mount Ebal Dump Salvage. MEDS. Some said that it means that we should all be on meds for doing this, but it actually stands for Mount Ebal Dump Salvage. It yielded 415 bone fragments, of which 81 were diagnostic. Now, Adam excavated 3,000 bones, and we did about 30% of his dump pile, and that's just my rough estimate. So I could be off a little bit, but I think about 30% of his dump. That means 70% of it is still there. And if we had access to the material, I'm going to be at Shiloh this winter. We would just love to be able to continue to wet sift that material. But look, in the portion that we did, we got 415 bone fragments. Since it's the end of the process, of course, most of them are fragments, but 81 of them are diagnostic. And the trained eye, a zooarchaeologist, for example, we use the Tel Aviv team, and they help us with our zooarchaeological analysis. They tell us the animals. And this might be interesting because, again, I told you we've got caprines, that's sheep and goat, and we've got bovines, and then a smattering of other animals, but no pork. And some of the smaller animals, though, Zertal did not find anything, say, like fish bone, but when you wet sift, you will find things that they would have missed in that analysis. And so it'll be very interesting to analyze these and see if we get some smaller faunal analysis. If you get good bone material, faunal bone material, then you can extract collagen from the bone. And with the collagen, you can do carbon-14 testing. And that then gives us another dating metric. We're not only looking then at a ceramic date, but we can then do some carbon-14 dates as well. And I'll show you something interesting on carbon-14 in a moment. But let's talk about the ceramic profile, the pottery profile. I'm a ceramicist. That means I'm a very boring individual. I sit around, literally, I spend many hours each week studying pieces of pottery. So yes, I need to get a life. But here's what we know. Zertal found about 3% of the pottery at El Bernat was LBA, late Bronze Age. Now, I'll give you just standard late Bronze Age dates, 1550 to 1200 BC. I would probably calibrate those a little bit, but I'll just sort of use those standard dates for now. So he's got about 3% coming from that time period, mainly from the latter part of it, what we would call LB2, say 13th century. And this is crucial. These are crucial stratum 2 loci that contain sherds that date to that LB1B, LB2A horizon. And I'm going to show you those slides next. Because if we have pottery at Mount Ebal, at El Bernat, within the rectangular and or round structure that dates to that horizon, it had to get there somehow. It could not have got there in the 13th century because it's buried. So if we were to agree that it's LB1B pottery, for example, then it has to have been there prior to the 13th century. Further evidence for an earlier phase of stratum 2 includes the remodeling of an Area B structure. Now, what do I mean by that? Four-room house. Adam Zertal believed that there was a classic Israelite four-room house, a forerunner of it, if you will, like an Iron One time period, a four-room house. I think that Shai in week 1 said that he was skeptical of whether that was actually a four-room house or not. For now, I'll assume that Adam was correct and that it was a four-room house. That house underwent a remodel. So if it was only there for one generation, it would not need a remodel. Normally that's going to happen in another phase is going to happen in another generation. So I think that gives you a further suggestion, and it's from stratum 2, from that earliest period. So if it's from, let's use Adam's dates, mid-13th century, and it's been remodeled, then that indicates that it's been around prior to that as well. So stratum 2 likely began earlier than Zertal realized and continued, I believe, in 2 phases. Now, let's talk about that. LB1, LB2A. My battery is running low. I just got a message. I need help, please. Somebody's going to have to plug me in here. A carinated bowl from stratum 2 was part of a favisa in pit 250 near installation 94. A carinated bowl, that's the one I showed you, was in the upper left-hand corner, and I'll zero in on it in just a minute. Zertal dates the bowl to the second half of the late Bronze Age, citing parallels from Hatzor Megiddo until Mevorka. I won't give you all the various strata. The open carinated bowl was a form specific to LB1, LB2A. All right, let me say that again. The open carinated bowl was a form specific to LB1A, LB1, LB2A. In other words, that form did not exist in the 13th century. Let me say that again. That form did not exist in the 13th century. So how do we get that open carinated bowl in pit 250 in the 13th century? It just doesn't work. That form almost entirely disappeared in late Bronze 2B. Therefore, the bowl from Mount Ebal was very likely dates to the LB1B, LB2A horizon. All right, everybody follow me there. What I'm arguing, suggesting, is that we have actually 7 pieces of pottery that all fit that profile. I'm just going to show you this one as an example, and then when we publish this more fully later, you'll have all 7 of them. And here's the bowl in question. So you're looking at a pottery plate, and you can see at the top, number 3, this is the carinated bowl. And I say carinated because you can see the bend in the middle. So it's the carination at the midpoint. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. So carination at the midpoint. You can see that it's a simple tapered rim. And this vessel, to be clear of what I'm saying, all the vessels on this slide, but the one I'm talking about is number 3. This vessel dates to the late Bronze 1B, late Bronze 2A horizon. It does not exist in the 13th century. Therefore, I am saying that we need to think about subdividing stratum 2, because there's material within stratum 2 that is from an earlier time period, which happens to match the biblical date for Joshua's altar. Now, the pottery books that everyone uses, myself included, written by Saigatin just 2 years ago, we were in desperate need of new pottery books. We've still been using Amiran from the 1960s, so now we finally have new pottery books. And Bob Mullins wrote the Late Bronze Age and Middle Bronze Age chapter. So when I'm citing examples here, I'm citing from Mullins, who's now currently excavating at Ebal Beth Makkah, wrote his dissertation on the Bronze Age pottery from Bet Shean. So this is Mullins and Yanai, and you can see the parallel in LB1B, LB2A parallel for the same vessel from the Lachish temples 1 and 2. Now, Mullins will tell you that the very best parallels that he got in writing the books came from those Lachish temples. And so it just so happens that you're dealing with the best parallel of the form from Ebal, number 3 here, and number 4 here. Now, if you're not used to looking at pottery plates, if that's not your thing, you may say, well, it's not an exact parallel. All right, we almost never get exact parallels. So we look more at macro features. Where is the carenation? Is it a ring base? What is the wear of the vessel? Does it evert? Does it invert? Things like this. So this is a very, very close parallel, actually, when it comes to citing those things. All right, now, both Shai and Ralph talked about scarabs and dye, and I want to put my 2 cents worth in there. The scarab on the right of your screen here, looking in the black section, the one on the right, that's scarab 1. And it has 4 cobras on it. And this is the one that Baruch Brandel dated to Ramesses II. This scarab comes from the corner of the altar that collapsed. I don't know if you realize this, but part of the altar collapsed and the ash and the material on the inside fell out. So we don't know a context on it, quite frankly. But fortunately, like the scarabs, we can normally figure out the iconography and date it from there. He dated this to Ramesses II, 13th century, supports the late date of the Exodus, which of course doesn't make me happy. What does make me happy is that about 18 months ago, Daphne Ben-Tor, Israel's leading scarab expert, she's in charge of the Egyptology section in the Israel Museum. Daphne Ben-Tor redated this scarab, and this is not published yet, but this is what she told me. Daphne redated this scarab to Thutmose III, which is 15th century, which does make me happy, which then matches the ceramic date we were discussing and supports the early date of the Exodus and conquest. So just be aware that Brandel and Ben-Tor are in disagreement on the dating of the scarab. The second scarab, the one on the left of your screen, you can see the cartouche on it. So there's no doubt, if you can read Middle Egyptian, there's no doubt what that is. That's Thutmose III. So that's the greatest of all the pharaohs. So Daphne Ben-Tor then would say that both of these scarabs are Thutmose III. In biblical terms, that's the pharaoh of the oppression. This is his scarab. And plausibly, this is brought out of Egypt and deposited here as along with some of the offerings in that lowest, just above bedrock material in what's called stratum 2 currently. Now, this was found in a pit just outside the main structure. So neither scarab is concretely, context cannot help us concretely date it. We're just going on epigraphy. What are the glyptic markings that are on them? So the idea that scarabs support the 13th century date for stratum 2 doesn't really hold water, because what people would tell you is that the Thutmose III one is a commemorative scarab. Now, in other words, later peoples created these. They were like trading cards. And anytime that the date supports the biblical date for the Exodus and conquest, this is what scholars will tell you. Oh, they must be commemorative. They'll tell you that at Jericho. Pritchard will tell you that at Gibeon. And now you got the same thing at Mount Ebal. You'll hear the same thing about scarabs from Shiloh. When they match the biblical date, well, they must be commemorative. So I have asked my scholars, like Daphne Ben-Tor and like Baruch Brandel, I've directly asked them both this question, and they have both agreed with me. I said, I find no criteria for deciding what's commemorative and what's not. We make this up. When we think that it doesn't match our date, then we just say it's commemorative. They agreed with me that there is no criteria. So it's very subjective. So then at the very least, let's say that these scarabs are neutral in the issue of dating, because they did not come from clean context. And we have Israel's 2 leading scarab experts in dispute about one of them. The other, we all agree, is Thutmose III, but some people think it's commemorative and some people think it's not. All right, on that, I better get a drink of water. Okay, now the die. You see the die-looking cube. Shai suggested, and I concur, that this is very likely what we would call well, if you can recall the biblical Urim and Thummim, the idea of casting lots to determine the will of God, Thelamancy, I believe, is the proper term for using sort of a type of prognostication from rolling the dice. We only have one of them, so we'll call it a die. I think that very well may be what you have here, and you have the vessel that Shai showed us with the hole in the bottom where they would like roll this and see what came out as a means of prognostication, or God showing his will through Urim and Thummim, or casting die, or however you want to term this. And nobody said this because probably they don't want to get yelled at for being too skeptical, so I'll say it. If it's found in Mount Ebal and this is Joshua's altar and it comes from stratum 2, who's to say that this isn't the actual Urim or Thummim? And maybe this one was white and the Thummim was black, because really we don't know what these things were. So this is the closest that we have to understanding this idea of determining God's will in some chance manner of prognostication. Of course, we could go on and on forever about these things, but there's the slide that Shai showed you with the die itself inside where they've drilled out the base of this vessel. They can roll it and then see what it comes out as. Are we going to sacrifice sheep or goats? And then they roll it to see. I don't know. All right. So scarab 1, I've already rambled on and talked about that, so I'll skip this slide here. But just remember that what I have highlighted at the bottom, the 15th century BC date further supports the need to subdivide and redate Zertal's stratum 2. And then on scarab 2, which I've also waxed on about, just looking at the highlighted portion, scarabs 1 and 2 derive from the 15th century BC and support a subdivision and redating of the round altar to the LB1B, LB2A horizon. Now, this is an earring and it's gold. There are actually 3 types of earrings found at Mount Ebal. You've got bronze earrings, silver earrings, and gold earrings. Now, the bronze ones shouldn't surprise us because bronze wasn't that valuable. And if you lost an earring, you might not turn the station wagon back around and go get it. But if you drop something gold in the ancient world or something silver, you searched for it. And I will illustrate this for you. In our excavation at Kirbet El Makatir, we excavated 1,322 coins. That's more than any site in Israel besides Masada, which doesn't really count because they took all their money with them when they went there. Of those 1,322 coins, 2 were gold, 5 were silver, and everything else was bronze. So 1,315 bronze coins, 5 silver coins, and 2 gold coins. The reason for that, I mean, we got so many because we metal detect and we're very systematic. But when you lose a gold coin, you go back looking for it. All right. You search until you find it. So it's very, very rare. Same thing with silver. Now, I say that to say this, you're looking at silver and gold earrings from Mount Ebal. These are not lost there, friends. These are offerings. They are placed there along with other votive vessels in these installations immediately outside the altar. These are earrings. I mean, ladies, this is something very valuable that you are giving to the Lord. All right. So you've got, not only is it an animal sacrifice, not only is it a grain offering, not only is the vessel itself then being broken, as we're finding, but then you're leaving gold. And as in the modern world, gold was extremely valuable. Some have argued that this earring is Egyptianized. I haven't personally been able to prove that yet. Now, having said all that, let's look at the text. Deuteronomy 27, verses 4 through 7. And when you have crossed the Jordan, set up these stones on Mount Ebal, as I command you today, and coat them with plaster. Coat them with plaster. Build there an altar to the Lord, an altar of stones. Do not use any iron tool on them. While it's still the Bronze Age, iron exists already. It's just not very common. We've not yet technically moved into the Iron Age. Build the altar of the Lord your God with field stones and offer burnt offerings on it. So the burnt offering was going to be completely consumed. The fellowship offering is only partially consumed. The rest of it is only partially burned up. The rest of it is literally eaten or consumed by the priest and by the family that gave it. Sacrifice fellowship offerings there, eating them and rejoicing before the Lord your God. Now here's the plaster that Shai showed us. Many chunks of plaster. This has not yet been analyzed. So many exciting things await us in the next few years as these things, come to publication. This has not been exposed to infrared or ultraviolet light. We don't know what writing we might be there, but clearly the reason that you plaster stones is because you're going to write on them. He's told to write the words of the law on there, whether that means the book of Deuteronomy, whether that means the last couple of chapters on curses and blessings, or some other part of it, but they're clearly supposed to write on these. Notice how that presupposes literacy at that time period. And so the further that we go, we continue to get hints that there was more literacy in early Israel than we had previously realized. So this plaster is just awaiting analysis, literally in a box at Haifa University. And here's the other pertinent passage, Joshua 8:30 and 31. Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel. As Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites, he built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool had been used. On it, they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. So Moses tells them what to do in Deuteronomy 27. Joshua 8 appears that they did it for once. Now here is, of course, modern Nablus, where ancient Shechem lies, Mount Gerizim on the left, Mount Ebal on the right. And this is looking down at the site. Many people who are unable to go there today because of the area in which it's located, this is the only view that they get. I've been there many times. I was there recently. And this is looking down at Tel Balata, ancient Shechem. The patriarchs were here, and that temple that you're looking at there, that is the very, very likely the temple of Baal Berith mentioned in the book of Judges. And this spans several generations. And the standing stone, the Maseva there at the front, might indeed even be the one that was plastered over and that had the words of the law written on it. So the Ark of the Covenant would have been here in the center, blessings coming from Mount Gerizim, curses coming from Mount Ebal. Here's another view looking across at Mount Ebal. And here's what we know. Moses in Deuteronomy 11:29 instructed the Israelites to pronounce blessings from Mount Gerizim, curses from Mount Ebal. Deuteronomy 27:12 and 13 indicates that they obeyed his instructions. Here you get another look down at Tel Balata. Sadly, most of ancient Shechem is underneath those buildings. And here's the ribdon of the standing stone. The rest of it was found instantly in the excavation, but that's the part that was in situ. And this is my team visiting the site that day. Almost no one goes there. And look at the size of that wall. That's cyclopean. That's when the Israelites arrived. That's what they saw. It would have had a mud brick that's 25, 30 feet high of stone still standing. And then there would have been a mud brick superstructure, another 25 or 30 feet on top of that. So this was massive. You can just get an idea of the maybe 5.3 meters wide also, probably constructed in MB2, MB3. And here's one of the gates of Shechem with the orthostats. And again, you can see the wall and the size of it and the significance of the site. This is where the covenant renewal ceremony takes place. This is the epicenter. And here I'm going to show you a series real quickly of sketches by Lane Rittmeyer as he was helping us understand the formation of the rectangular altar that covered the round altar. So you can see the rectangular altar as it's coming to be. And there's the things I've been talking about: installation 94, surface 61, pit 250 from stratum 2. Remember, in pit 250, that's where you have the hammers, that's where you have the chalice and these things and the pottery that I was showing you. And now they are going to begin to fill and cover it intentionally to protect it, just like the rectangular altar is later covered intentionally to protect it with a mantle. So is the earlier one. See that taking place. And then ultimately those walls are built in to cancel it out, to cover it. There's the fill from the earlier level that's in. Ultimately then, from its usage in stratum 1, more ash, more bone is going to continue to compile. Very black in nature. And then here's what it would have looked like. Ralph pointed out last week how you have the double ramp system encircling this. The sacrifice in the middle. If you were to go directly down from that fire, what would you run into? The round altar. So it's done right on top of the round altar to commemorate the original primogenial, if you will, sacrifice that was done there by Joshua. And of course, here's a picture you've all now come to know well. Here is Michael Ludini, who's the oldest member of my dig team. He was 84 when this picture was taken. He'll be 88 this summer when we're back in the field. And he had never been to Mount Ebal, and that just goes to show you how hard it is to get there, and the permissions and the problems. And, you know, there's reasons why they want you to take bulletproof buses and things like that. But this just was a highlight of Mike's life to be able to go to Mount Ebal. And Aaron, thank you for facilitating those who have been able to go in recent years. I don't think we could have done it without you. When my team arrived for the MEDS project, we arrived with two things. I asked everybody to bring old-fashioned Quaker oats, and an army runs on its tummy, and my army runs on Quaker oats. And I taught the chefs at our hotel how to cook Quaker oats the way I like them. I'll give you the secret recipe later. And the method to the madness here is that I was submitting a funding proposal to the Quaker Oats Foundation to get money from them for our dig. So I wanted to make sure that they got this good picture. And then I asked everybody to bring Ritz crackers because we're staying at the Ritz Hotel. And I thought it would be a lot of fun to give the manager all of these Ritz crackers. So Quaker Oats and Ritz crackers, don't knock it till you try it. Now here's our star of the show, what you've been waiting to see. We uncovered in wet sifting a small lead tablet that was folded in half. We missed it in dry sifting. Adam Zertal missed it in dry sifting. Now, Adam Zertal's dump pile on Mount Ebal was much cleaner than the Bar Elan dump pile at Shiloh from the 1980s. The one in Shiloh, they were throwing away, just shocking what we're finding in that dump pile. We did not find much in Zertal's. I mean, it was relatively speaking very clean, but we did still find a lot because some things you can only find them through wet sifting. When you take that, it's about 2 inches by 2 inches, and it's covered in dirt. It just looks like a stone chip. Guess how many stone chips you're going to encounter every day while you're sifting? Thousands of them. And so it just looks like another stone chip, and it's tossed. Zertal's team missed it. My team missed it in dry sifting. But then it goes to the next process in the protocols, and then it's washed. And once it's washed, it pops. Someone showed it to me, and I knew immediately what we had. This is what we call archaeologically a defixio, or a curse tablet, an amulet. Mount Ebal, according to the Bible, was the mountain of the curse. And so what do we have? A curse tablet. So what they would do in antiquity is they would write curses on these tablets. Job chapter 19, verse 24 talks about writing in lead. So the idea is very ancient. The oldest example that we have comes from the 5th century BC, so maybe Persian period. But no doubt there are other examples that haven't been found yet, because as we proved, they're not being found because everybody's throwing them away. They're small and they're hard to find. Zertal missed it and my team missed it. So without wet sifting, then you've got to go back to the dump piles if you're going to get these. Now, Lorenzo Negro in the new excavations at Jericho just published a curse tablet that goes all the way back to the early Bronze Age, okay, written on lead. So they are extremely ancient. Now, this particular style, to make it clear that I'm not overstating what we have, this is more typical of maybe the early Hellenistic period on into the Roman period. That doesn't mean that this style did not exist sooner. We just simply have not found them yet because they're all being thrown away. So when we saw this, we knew what it was, and you can see where it folds in half. It was made of lead, and we decided to see what would happen in the lab. And so when we got it into the lab and just did the least amount of touching with it, we got a tiny bit of crumbling. And so we immediately stopped and decided that we would have to find technology that would open this. And so, as I told you, I did not have access to this material because of the worldwide health crisis that we've been in. I haven't been able to go to Israel. It was in my private storage, hidden. No one could have found it but me, so it wouldn't have done any good to send anyone there. So when I finally got to go back a couple of months ago, we had all prearranged for a university in Prague, Czechoslovakia, with expertise in scanning lead objects to partner with us. I don't know why I was thinking that you couldn't scan lead. I think I saw that in Superman or something, that you can't scan lead, but that's incorrect. You can, and the University of Prague has expertise in this. So it has now been to Prague twice in the last few months, has undergone tens of thousands of radiometric scans, and we begin to have a story that unfolds. And the data, most of it is still forthcoming, but we need data processing. And so now you've got many hours of data processing work that has to be done to crunch all these images so that we can properly read them. If we get what we think we have, then we'll need epigraphists trained in the ancient handwriting styles to then come in and be able to differentiate. This is, if it is Hebrew, for example, what century it's from, and to be able to use it as a dating metric. So, shall I stop now or should I go on, Aaron? Okay. I'll tell you what we have so far. Here's just a few of those radiometric scans looking at different images on the outside and then the inside. Believe me, this thing's been scanned more than anything you could possibly imagine. Here's what we know so far. I was getting messages from Prague. They were coming in one at a time. The first message I got was, there are 2 lines of text. So I said, hallelujah, good, 2 lines of text. This is beautiful. It's a curse tablet, and we can actually begin to get the text. We know it's a curse tablet. That's not open for dispute. The question is, can we get the curse off of it? And what might that curse be? Because Joshua's altar is built on the place of the curse. So, you can clearly see the significance. The next message I got was, the text is Hebrew. So at this point, I remember I forwarded this to Aaron, and I think I heard him shout hallelujah from Ofra. And then the next text that I got from Prague said, the first letter is Aleph. And now at this point, I'm just beside myself because I realized that the basic Hebrew word for curse is arur, which begins with an Aleph. And, unfortunately, that's all I know right now, is that we have 2 lines of text at the least. It appears that we have a lotus and some other imagery on the outside of it as well. Could be hieroglyphic, because it could be even Middle Egyptian or hieroglyphic, something we need to look at. But we have 2 lines. It appears to be Hebrew. I can't say that positively right now because all of this is still very tentative. It appears to be Hebrew. It appears that the first letter is Arur. So we're very early in the research, but you now know what I know about the writing on the tablet. If we were never able to prove what the writing was on the tablet, it would still be very important. And it adds to the significance of this being Joshua's altar. Even if it was from, say, the Hellenistic period, that means that someone in the Hellenistic period in 300 BC knew this was Joshua's altar and left a curse tablet there. If it proves to be much older than that, then it will get even more interesting. We also recovered a blade, a bronze blade, and notice how it's rounded, bronze blade. And this is interesting because the Talmud presents the correct procedure for slaughtering animals. And although the Talmud is a later source, it probably follows more ancient traditions. The Talmud prohibits stabbing animals and suggests that when slaughtering an animal, pointed tip knives can cause damage, or I guess I should say suffering, to the animal, since the tip is prone to tear the skin rather than slice it. The idea is that in the sacrificial process, it should be humane. You're going to slice the jugular and minimize the suffering to the animal. Therefore, a round-tipped knife is the safer option and represents an ideal sacrificial tool for Israelite animal sacrifices. So let's look at it again. Found in our wet sifting process, Adam did get quite a few metal objects, but they missed this one, and this one appears that it could be a sacrificial blade. We also recovered flints. Now, Zertal had lots of flints that they published. He did not find a single sickle blade. Now, the sickle blade, he interpreted that as an indication of no agrarian usage on the site. Probably right. We did, however, in his dump, find 1 sickle blade. Now, remember, we only did 30% of the dump. Maybe there are others. Now, 1 sickle blade does not mean he was wrong necessarily, but it's new data that we have now that we did not have before. So Ben Gurion University, under Steve Rosen's supervision, Steve's the leading expert in Israel on flints from this time period. And if you're not aware of this, after Iron 1, flints basically diminish in importance greatly. People aren't really using flints after the Iron Age 1 period. But at this point, they certainly are. And we have a number of tools. We have awls, we have boring tools. We got a lot of debitage, of course. We have knife blades and so forth. All these flints that we were able to recover that were inadvertently discarded by Adam's team. Again, a flint covered in dirt, something that's, you can see how people can miss that. And then we have these enigmatic guys that you've learned about the last couple of weeks. Of all of these found, this is a telltale sign of early Israelites, by the way. Okay, I'm looking at the back screen and there's a dove superimposed there. I thought, oh my goodness, have I missed a dove on here? All right. So there's 3 dots, and there's a lot of different configurations of dots that's documented. But Finkelstein did a subsequent study of these, and of all of these punctured handles like this found around Israel, 80 to 90% of them come from 2 sites. Anyone want to guess which 2 sites? Correct. Mount Ebal and Shiloh. Mount Ebal and Shiloh, the 2 most important cultic sites in Israel, and 2 sites that I'm privileged to be working. And the rest of them may have come from those sites and been, sent somewhere else. So we still don't understand what they represent, because some have 2 dots and 3 and 4 and different configurations. Some seem to be smiling, some seem to be frowning. So we have more questions than answers, but we only found one that Adam missed in his done. Now, a couple of things I want to talk about on this slide. You see all those black specks on there? Now, some of those are mica, so black stone, and this is like temper that's added to the clay to give it strength. But one thing that Iron Age 1 Judges period pottery is famous for is the organic inclusions. And that's why often it has holes in it, because with time, the organic material falls out, and then you're left with pock marks in the pottery. In the case of this handle, for some reason, it really doesn't show those pock marks, but some of these black specks are organic material, charcoal. Guess what you can do with charcoal? You can carbon date it. And so when I was preparing for this lecture, I'd never thought of this before. Maybe someone else has come up with it before me, but I thought, wow, we've never thought of this or tried this. Bigger chunks we might actually be able to extract from the pottery as another dating metric to use. Now, the second thing I want to comment on is at the very top of the slide, you'll notice sort of an ovoid depression. These things are not depression, but marking. These things don't just happen randomly. It appears to be, and when I saw this in the field for the first time, when this was washed, the next day and I looked at it, I said, oh, surely this can't be what it looks like. To me, it looks like, I hope you're sitting down, it looked like a foot-shaped enclosure. And I said, well, surely it can't be, and I must be imagining things. But, we analyzed it, and whatever it is, there it is. So we'll have to do further testing on this and observe that. But at least now you heard it from me that we have, on our 1 punctured handle, we have what appears to be a foot-shaped enclosure. Could be accidental or random, but anyway, that's what we have. Oh, by the way, look at the big black chunk in the upper right hand of your screen. That's what I'm talking. I can't tell from the photo for sure that that's carbonized. It could be mica, but it's probably carbon material. And a chunk that size, we might be able to carbon date. And now here's another look at the punctured handle. We'll take 1,000 different photographs and different lights, and so that we're sure of what we're looking at. We also found an awl, perfectly preserved awl. So it's ancient. It's got the square shaft and head, so we know that it's ancient, and it's in perfect condition. So an awl was a tool. Remember that if someone was a bond slave and wanted to become a permanent lifetime slave, remember the household, they would have put an awl through their ear as a sign of marking of a bond servant. Which brings us then to the final slide, and we end with the same quote with which we began, which is from our friend Larry Steger, who deceased a few years ago. And so now he knows that this really was an altar. Just kidding, he was a great guy. But Steger said, if there is an altar on Mount Ebal, as Zertal claims, we biblical scholars and archaeologists should all go back to kindergarten, and class is now dismissed. Okay, that's my argument.
Thank you so much, Scott. we are in tension. We want to know what's going on with that tablet. So keep us updated. So before you start diving into the questions we have quite a few. Just, what would be the repercussions of this amulet, this curses tablet on, archaeology, biblical archaeology, Israelites, alphabet? What would be the repercussions?
It's a great question. And I just saw what time it was. So we're gonna have to charge people extra for the extra time that I've talked, okay? I'll be brief in my answers. The ramifications are pretty big. Zertal would be case study number one. I mean, here he becomes a believer in the historicity of the text based on Ebal. If you've got a curse tablet, it's just further substantiation of what Zertal experienced. So I think it would be huge. All right, I'm going to look quickly at the chat box and see what we have. Scroll up to the top. And I apologize, this is not my computer. All right, I'm going to need some help, please. Oh, progress. Hawkins' late dating confused me as to chronology of tabernacle cults. Seeing your excavating qualifies the early dating. Given early dating and confirming of Joshua's altar, where is the tabernacle at the corresponding time here? The ceremony of the blessings and curses. Okay, I think I understand the question. Yeah, so when this ceremony is taking place at Mount Ebal, where is the tabernacle? That's a good question. It could have been there, or it could have been between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. And our timing at Shiloh is really interesting. We have a gap at Shiloh for our pottery that the gap begins at about the time that the altar is built, the rectangular altar is built at Ebal, and then our pottery picks back up about the time that the Ebal altar goes out of function. So an idea that we will talk about a lot in the coming years was the tabernacle at Shiloh? We know it was, according to Joshua 18:1. It was there then for a long time, and then did it move to Ebal for a century, unrecorded in the Bible, but perhaps the archaeology points to that. And then when that altar goes out of function intentionally, it goes back to Shiloh as recorded in 1 Samuel 4. These are the types of things that keep me awake at night. All right. Will you be at San Antonio? I'm arriving Thursday afternoon. Have many questions. Do you have plans to publish the results of the Ebal sifting project? If so, when might that come out? Yes, probably with Shai's publications in his Manasseh survey series is how I would like to do it. Question, would the pieces of plastered stone that are waiting to be analyzed be from the rectangular altar or the circular altar? Neither. That's probably from the stones that were plastered over where the words of the law were written. In my view, that would be from the earlier altar period. Where would the writing Joshua made of the Torah be on the altar be? Again, same question. I think it would be on the stones, not necessarily on it. Are you familiar with the work of Tim Mahoney? Does his dating with the film work for your finding? I am familiar with Tim's dating. He is a friend of mine. And Tim doesn't take a stand on the dating, but he tends to favor what's called the new chronology, trying to redate all of history by 250, 300 years. And no, I do not follow that at all. I think the biblical chronology is fine just the way it is, and the archaeological evidence aligns with it just fine. So Aaron, is that enough, or do you want me to field a couple more?
Let's do 2 more and wrap it up.
All right. Did Zertal publish any pictures of the round altar? Drawings, but not pictures, because he would have had to have dismantled part of the rectangular altar in order to get good photos. I'm sure they exist, but I know there are drawings, and his report is easily available, by the way, the preliminary report. This question probably has an obvious answer, but I'm not making the connection. I don't remember God instructing the patriarchs to construct a round altar. Can you tell me what I'm missing? No, we don't have that. He didn't tell them specifically. When they're told to construct altars, it doesn't give us details, whether they're round or square, or rectangular. We have earthen altars, we have stone altars, and more questions than we have answers. So there we go. Thank you guys for being a part of this today. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you, Scott. I just want to add that the round altars is something that you also find in the footprint structures in the Jordan Valley. So it seems like there is this type of bama, or high ground of worshiping, that is a round circular monument. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how that corresponds with the rectangular altar on Mount Ebal and later on in the temple. Scott, thank you so much. We are waiting anxiously to hear more news about the amulet and other things from the seeds and the dating that you might be able to do as well. But thank you so much, and thank everyone for being with us here. We look forward to seeing you again next Sunday. We're going to basically move from archaeology to the analysis of the biblical text in light of the archaeology. So you'll be hearing Tzvi Konigsberg next week talking about the importance of the Joshua's altar in the Bible, not just in the stories of Joshua and in Deuteronomy, but also in other places. And then you'll be hearing me in 2 weeks. So thank you, everyone. And
Aaron, can I say one final thing?
Sure.
When you mentioned Zvi, I would be remiss if I did not thank him for his help in getting the tablet back and forth to Prague and helping run all errands. And so he was a key part of our team. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Zvi. Thank you, everyone. Shalom from Israel and Houston. And we'll be seeing you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.